my name is Rebecca Hayes, and I'm an intern at the Pacifica Historical Society and host of tonight's show, Footprints of Pacifica. We get together every week to discover and explore the lore of lovely Pacifica, its character and characters. The focus of tonight's show is the history of the Pacifica Historical Society. To help me learn about this topic, we have in studio charter member Shirley Dry. So Shirley, let's get started talking about the importance of historical societies. What's the value of having a historical society, and why is it important for a community to have one?
I think that my field is archaeology, which sort of is a natural segue into history. And it seems to me that a community, as it matures, begins to look back. And if you don't have the records and the archives and the memories, there's a blank, and you're always going to wonder, what was it? Why did we miss it? And it seemed to me that it was a vital aspect of community life to have a historical society, to record not only the past but the present, and to leave a legacy for the future as a part of children's education, because they would certainly be studying their own history at some point.
Okay. So the Historical Society formed out of the fervor around the bicentennial. Did the bicentennial committee have become the Historical Society, or did the two crowds just overlap? And what caused you to want to form a historical society at that time?
Well, by the time that bicentennial was over, my best recollection is that there was already a lot of talk and feeling that we wanted to form a historical society. Up to that point in time, we had a city historian, and that was filled by a woman named Angel, and I can't remember her last name, but she was quite a character here locally, and an elderly woman even when I arrived back in the 50s. And then Dima Savage became a city historian, and it was as if we were, the next step was to form a historical society.
Okay. And speaking of Dima Savage, can you tell us about some of the early personalities? She was the first president, right?
Yes, she was. And Dima was one of the most interesting, intelligent, competent people I've ever known. Mm-hmm. And delightful as a friend. And she had one shortcoming, and in some ways it was not a shortcoming. She was really not good at delegating. She was fast-moving, and she just always found it easier to do things herself. And what transpired as she and her husband acquired the Valleymar Station restaurant and managed it was that Dima did everything herself, and the Historical Society itself sort of went into a quiescent phase, with no meetings. Anything that needed to be done, Dima did and took care of. And she certainly made a huge contribution to the community, both as city historian and as the first president of this society.
Okay, and in 1983, the Historical Society got together again and kind of reconstituted. I think Donna Starr became the president at that time, so can you tell us maybe about some of the personalities from kind of the second era of the Historical Society?
Donna was another very interesting person, very competent, very capable, very domineering. She knew how she wanted to manage things. She was, in some ways, like Dima, she was an interesting character, a colorful character, but very different from Dima. But certainly she had leadership ability, and started the Historical Society rolling along, conducting regular meetings and having occasional speakers or programs.
Okay. And during this time, Connie Brown was the treasurer, right, you said?
Yes, I believe she was.
And then what about some of the other people that we had talked about? Could you tell us about them?
Well, I do not remember Nita Buchanan in the context of the Historical Society, but she certainly was historical herself and has played a very vital role in the community. Dodie Payne I first knew as when she joined the volunteer program at the Sanchez Adobe Historic Site, and that was in 1979. So that has quite a history too. And Dodie's another one. She's colorful, she's competent, capable, very dedicated. You're lucky to have somebody like Dodie around volunteering, and she was among our first group of volunteers at the Adobe, and this year all of us who are still there got 30-year pins from the San Mateo County Historical Association.
Wow.
And let's see, who else could we talk about? Joan, I have known for many years, and she has been a past president, and she again is a competent leader. I was secretary during the time that Joan was president, and we did become acquainted.
Joan Levin that was in the mid-1990s, I think you said.
Right. And she certainly, had a sense of history associated with her house, which was the Dollar Radio site of the Dollar Radio station. When I first came to California, my husband and I kind of had an explorer's mentality. We were constantly looking at things, and we would drive there and see the lights and the structure, and always wondered what it was. And I was always delighted when I was able to see it. And the first time I saw it, the room with the equipment in it was still in place.
Okay.
And that's no longer true. Let's see, Lydia and Paul Azevedo, for goodness sakes. I remember them when Lydia was expecting her first child. I went to work for the Tribune in 1966. And of course, Paul worked for the Tribune back then. And I am not sure how many directions we met in, but we seemed like we were friends. I remember them being at our house, and Paul was already, he was interested in history, certainly, and Lydia definitely was. She was a teacher, and they were with us all the way and making a contribution and part of the history themselves. I can't think really of anything else.
I read
Paul
in the
Lydia.
Tribune, one of the programs that Paul Azevedo put together was a progressive dinner through the various historical spots of Pacifica.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
He did. Yeah, that was very quite an interesting event, and took a lot of planning. He was really made a great contribution to the community. We had some interesting events during that period of time. I can't think of anything else to say about them. I noticed Karen Anderson and Lorraine Reagan are mentioned. Anderson's, of course, associated with the Anderson store, which is still there, that red building at the corner of Oceana and Carmel, I believe is what it is, across from Oceana High School. It's still there, and it was one of the early structures here. The earliest pictures we have of the community show the Anderson store, and certainly the family, and I believe Lorraine Reagan was a part of that.
Okay.
And it's still a restaurant, and I didn't know the two women, so I can't really say anything about them.
Okay. While I was going through the archives, I found a Tribune article that I think still describes the Historical Society. In 1987, Grace McCarthy, who is a very involved member, was awarded the opportunity by the Peninsula Community Foundation to contribute $10,000 to a nonprofit of her choice. And her criteria and the reasons that she chose the Pacifica Historical Society were based on several things that I wanted to talk about. So the organization that she was going to give this money to had to be long-lasting. It should be an investment and not just an expenditure. It should benefit both the young and the old, and it should have an educational tie-in. It should involve many volunteers, and it should benefit this community, Pacifica, which had been her home for 45 years at that point, and should hopefully be an example for other community organizations. And it should involve a worthwhile project that might go too long delayed without this windfall. And Grace McCarthy said of the Pacifica Historical Society, "It met my test. In 4 short years since it had been reactivated, much has been accomplished. Enlargements of old pictures have been secured and exhibited. The first interview tapes made. Video, TV tapes, and slide collections are growing. Informative quarterly meetings are being held, and files are made available for research to the public." So, and I should mention that I found this article because the Tribune donated all their newspaper morgues to the Historical Society in 1990, and a group known as the Clippers got together and got to work on cutting out all the articles that are important to Pacifica's history and building the archives. So what type of importance does the Pacifica Historical Society archives have to the research and to the public?
Well, certainly anybody who is studying history, it is a resource. And if you've done historic research, you would know that it can be extremely complex and difficult. And if we didn't have archives to offer people, organized archives, it's a bit of a morass and often cannot even be done. There are open questions. How did the Sweeney Ridge get its name? Well, no one really knows, to be honest with you. And this is typical of what you lose if there is no historical continuity, if there isn't any recording of events and names and structures and people. And so I think that pretty well covers it. Just simply without archives, you can't do research, really. It's very, very difficult. I know I've been faced with this.
Okay.
So
now I want to maybe take a look at some of the more contemporary projects of the Historical Society. So our first is going to be a roll-in video of the work that's going on the Little Brown Church.
I've been asked to relate the tale of the Little Brown Church here in Pacifica and efforts that are being made to preserve it and to restore it. Way back in the early part of this century, of the 20th century, the lady appeared before the city council, Lydia Azevedo, and asked of the council, what are you going to do with the vacated Little Brown Church? It served for 18 years as a police department, and now it's vacant, and it's an old building that deserves to be preserved. There was no immediate answer on this, but the Historical Society of Pacifica took on the challenge of making sure that the Little Brown Church would be preserved or would remain where it stood. That was a big challenge because there were plans to remove the building and to cut it in two and to perhaps sell the entire site. So there was a challenge, and the Historical Society went to work to try to get the word out that we had a project, and it was that of saving and reconstructing the Little Brown Church. In any case, the Historical Society established a committee which went to work on not only financing it but also restoring it, and these efforts went forward from that date. In the process, the challenge was to have some kind of a connection between the society and the church, either a lease or an ownership. We had no idea of owning it, but the necessity for having a lease became apparent, and we went to work on drawing a lease and establishing a relationship between the building and the society, so that it would be possible to raise public funds for that purpose, or raise funds from all sources for that purpose. In any case, finally it became apparent that we had to do more than that, the matter of keeping the church on the site was something that would be of public interest, and we knew it had to come to an election. We circulated the necessary papers. It was brought to an election. The city also put up a counter proposal, but fortunately both the city proposal and our own proposal on the ballots indicated that the church would be saved, would remain on the site, and would stay there unless the people of Pacifica decided otherwise. The election was held. The city proposal actually got more votes, but in any case, I think, can say that we lost the battle but won the war, because the main objective was to keep the church on site and preserved without a vote of the people. And that's where the matter stood. And our efforts have gone forward ever since.
On June 1st, 2001, was the first meeting of the Little Brown Church Preservation Committee. Meetings to save the Little Brown Church were unproductive with the city, and the following 3 years we went through an initiative election process, lease negotiations, and finally on September 13th, 2005, we signed a 20-year lease with the city. A ceremony was held on the porch, the front steps of the Little Brown Church on October 23, 2005, where the mayor presented us the key to the building. Work began immediately, entirely made up of volunteers, removing and disposing of items left in the building by the police department. Interviews were held with historic preservation architects, and one was chosen to secure an up-to-date survey, develop as-built plans, and develop a project plan suitable for soliciting bids for restoration. Knowing we would rely heavily on grant generation, a committee was formed to attract grant monies to the project. Cost estimated for renovation of the building and certificates of general liability insurance were also needed. All these details needed to be worked out prior to beginning restoring the structure. Now, a few highlights of our efforts to create Pacifica's first community museum and event center. Our architect, first talked of supporting the roof of the 1948 addition and additional rafter support. So Dave Blackman, a local contractor, placed a long glulam beam in here, brought his heavy equipment, and he was assisted, by Rick Lee, a local contractor. The next step was having the building tinted to destroy subterranean termites and wood-boring beetles. This was our first major expenditure, $15,000, and the first of many. A costly project that sorely needed was a new roof. This was a cost of $34,800. In conjunction with the roof work, bids were solicited for installation of gutters and drain pipes. Part of the project cost of $6,300 was underwritten by one of our members. Knowing that at that time that the permit process would probably cost $10,000, we immediately needed a special use permit with a fee of $2,750. We petitioned the city to give us a blanket waiver of permit fees. Since the building was to be used for something other than a church or a police station, a special use permit was required, and we finally received this blanket waiver of fees in May of this year. Our first efforts to make the building weather-tight was to seal the bell tower. But when the bid had been awarded and workers were under the church placing additional sill bolts on the foundation, they discovered the entire southeast corner of the building had deteriorated with dry rot. An additional contract was drawn up, the bid awarded for the lower portion of the bell tower. The building was jacked up 4 inches and a 20-foot pony wall installed. Cost of this restoration of that bell tower was $50,000, with a generous donation from Carl and Eileen Baldwin to cover the cost. The south side of the building was the most weather damaged. Redwood siding, trim, and fascia, and the planks on the buttresses were curled up and split. Entire new buttresses were installed with cement pads and a new door and some siding. Since before this work began, though, 9 bottlebrush trees had to be removed from the side of the building. They were creating moisture. The next phase was painting the south side of the building, and then we began on the interior. The lath and plaster, which was severely damaged, especially the ceiling area, was removed along with unneeded partitions placed by the police department. A huge amount of debris was formed, and it was removed by volunteers, the Pacific Islanders football team. A heavy, dirty work. Earlier, we had the PG&E disconnect our electric source from the city, and a new meter panel, a mast outside, and junction box with outlets installed. The restoration team next made the decision to have the electrical rough-in work done, and this has been done, inspected, and passed by the city. Also, 9 smoke detectors, hardwired with battery backup, have been placed throughout the building. Rough-in plumbing was next on the agenda, and we encountered a major problem with a blocked sewer line from the roots of a heritage tree in the northeast portion of the building. The city, as property owners, has completed replacing the old line from the street to the building. A contract has been signed with a local firm to install energy-efficient furnace complete with new registers, grills, and thermostat. Currently, we are attempting to meet the challenge of bringing the building up to American disability standards. A 3-story lift is needed, and we have currently a bid on this for $15,000, and a contract has been received for the layout of the opening, the excavation and forming of the lift pad and the framing. This is the point where as of today, July the 13th, 2010. There have been a lot of challenges in continuing restoration of this century-old building. The problem that has set us back over the past 5 years is the lack of grant funding. The work has been completed in phases as the funds have become available, thus making the fundraising committee work overtime, and we applaud them for their efforts. We've not lost our enthusiasm for this project, and with the support of the community, we will see this community event center become a reality. Thank you.
Great. So before we move on to some of the other projects, we have this picture of the Pacifica Historical Society turning in all their petitions to get this Little Brown Church campaign on the ballot. So this was one of their earlier projects. So some of the other projects are the railroad car. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Shirley?
The Ocean Shore Railroad was founded about 1910. I'm not sure the exact date, and it intended to go from San Francisco to Santa Cruz. The railroad was never really completed, but it did run trains up and down. We have pictures of them running right past the Little Brown Church, and eventually, in 1922, it discontinued operation. And as you can well imagine, over the decades, what we would have called archival material in terms of the trains disappeared, were sold, cut up, whatever. And finally, someone discovered that there was the last remaining car of that train in Sebastopol. And someone had made a transport delivery up in that area. I can't tell you who the people involved were, but we've got a lot of people with connections and good intentions and hard work. Brought the car down, and it now sits in Pacifica and is undergoing restoration. Yes, and there you see people working on it. And when it's completed, it will be refurbished to look like it did when it was new. We have plenty of photographs of the train, and it will be a part of our museum and event center.
Great.
Too.
And another big project, of course, that the Historical Society does is this show, Footprints in Pacifica. And the first episode aired on May 23rd, 2006, and this is episode 88. And Shirley, you've been on a couple of the shows, and they've been award-winning shows. Can you tell us about that?
The first one was on the Ohlone, and these are the native Californians who lived in this area and had villages right here in Pacifica. Two are actually documented. One in the vicinity of the golf course in Sharp Park, and the other one at the Sanchez Adobe. We know a great deal about the one at the Sanchez Adobe, and I had, as an archaeologist, I had excavated in that period, and so I did a program for them. I accumulated quite an archive of native materials, and so that was the first program I was on, and the second one was on Open Space, where I appeared with Julie Lancel. She's a city council woman here in Pacifica, and our portion of the show won an award. The idea was to determine what would the importance of open space and why we should have it, and how you acquire it, this type of thing, and this is the third one.
Great. So the Historical Society is part of the crew, is part of the crew of the show, and they do a lot to help put together each show and to produce all of them. And it was the idea of Frank Winston, who is here, and he was the host of the first 51 episodes. And can you tell us a little bit about him, or where he came up with the ideas for the episodes?
I'm not sure where Frank came up with the idea for episodes, but he was certainly a gifted host. He was host, I believe, both times that I was on, and I really admired his style as host of these programs. Really a competent man, very talented, hardworking, certainly made a contribution, and then unfortunately he died. and but we've carried on, and certainly in the spirit of Frank's dream and effort.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most impressive things you guys do at the Historical Society. So as we wrap up, do you want to tell us maybe about your best experience with the Historical Society, or what's been rewarding about being a member and a part of it?
It's hard for me to give you a clear definition of why I feel strongly about this. I certainly consider it a privilege to have been a part of it and to have participated in creating these videos. Everything we do is, to me, is both gratifying and fun. And I find that in volunteer efforts that those are two really important aspects. And for me, the Historical Society certainly satisfies that. We're preserving the past, we're making it come alive, we're creating an educational environment for youngsters who are interested in history and will be able to do research and find whatever aspect it is they're looking for. There are certainly many, many aspects to Pacifica's history that we haven't even mentioned.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us about the Historical Society. And if you'd like to get involved with the Historical Society, you can get in touch with us at our P.O. Box, which is Box 752, Pacifica, 94044, or call at 650-359-5462. And as we wrap up the show, we thought it would be nice to end it with the poem that Frank Winston loved to read at the end of each show that he hosted by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And the lives of great men remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time.